Stop demonizing keeping. What do you think when you see this kind of pull-up? At this point, the movement has changed so much, it is not even a pull-up anymore. But why is that? Keeping. To use other parts of your body to gain impulse or momentum. If you show this kind of pull-up to any calisthenic guy in 2025, he will spit you in the face and be gladly offended by the simple fact that you call whatever that is a pull-up. And nobody will defend you. In fact,
they will cheer on your suffering.
And it makes sense. Pull-ups are hard, especially in the beginning. Now, 20 pull-ups in a row to some guys might not be very impressive, but for a beginner it seems impossible. Until the guy that says that he can do 20 pull-ups starts doing them like this. Right, that is why keeping is hated. People brag about some achievements of theirs that aren't done with what most people will regard as good form. It is kind of a guy saying that he can do planche, but proceeds to do a bent arm planche and call it a day. While everybody who doesn't train calisthenics will be surprised. It is like they are taking away something you work hard for, while showing it to everybody else. But maybe keeping is not so bad. Keeping in a competition can define who is going to win. After all, if we are talking about hundreds of reps, the effect of keeping will slowly compound while everybody else is going to be tired. And the means justify the ends training philosophy coming from CrossFit to achieve and complete the repetition, the spine form, and the use of keeping is also imposed on beginners, which will result in injuries. Let's say a beginner with poor shoulder mobility and lack of back strength does a keeping pull-up. His poor mobility along with the sudden eccentric fall of the keeping pull-up might destroy his shoulder and elbow health. So it is understandable why people hate CrossFit and as a result demonize keeping. But hear me out, maybe keeping is not so bad. Any calisthenics gym or fitness guy in 2025 has a sort of disdain to CrossFit for the reasons I just stated. But not only CrossFit was affected, but also the view of keeping in exercise. Now any kind of keeping is demonized, regarded as bad form, and people will look at you weird for not doing a perfect form exercise. And you know who I'm talking about, the kind of guys that if you do a slight change in technique, they will say, "0." And in the same way, I think that the excessive use of keeping without knowing why you do it is wrong. I also think that this kind of technique policing is not so beneficial to many beginners or any kind of training in general. Weightlifting or calisthenic training has always evolved over time. And when you demonize things, people stop experimenting, and without trying new things, calisthenics training will never evolve. The same thing happens when you do a range of motion deemed incomplete. But keeping is not the devil. It shouldn't be treated as something to never be done, because as everything else, it can become a tool, a means to something. And specifically in calisthenics, keeping becomes necessary at some point. Keeping is the act of using a body part not generally used in a specific exercise to generate momentum in order to complete a repetition. Let's say, as an example, using legs to propel yourself in a pull-up. I'm not saying that keeping should be a standard and that you should always do it, but I think that keeping, or at least the slight forms of it, has a specific time and place to do it. If you have a valid reason, then slight keeping can be done. Why not? For example, keeping can be done to do more reps in a specific set, in other words, more volume. Let's say you are reaching failure in either bodyweight dips or pull-ups and you are very close to it. You start keeping slightly with your legs while you push hard through failure. Wouldn't that be a reasonable use of keeping? Such keeping will allow you to go extra hard in that specific moment. Maybe to reach true failure if that really exists, allowing you to go to those extra repetitions that otherwise without keeping you wouldn't have been able to do, while staying more time under that state of muscle exertion. There's a valid reason to use keeping, in this case to train hard and reach failure. And this could be applied to dips, keeping with your legs, or maybe push-ups using your hips slightly. Of course, if you do it in the beginning, keeping wouldn't make sense. The purpose here is to get to those final reps while keeping slightly. So we have a valid reason to do keeping. Not only could you use keeping as a way to get a few more reps while being close to failure, but also while learning calisthenic skills. I think it is very unreasonable to expect a beginner to learn a few of the calisthenic skills without any kind of momentum. Let's say a muscle up, for example. Just by remembering the feeling of impotence, of simply not being able to go up, the difficulty of what a muscle up implies. You can say that expecting perfect form without any kind of keeping in a muscle up, especially to beginners, is wrong. In this case, using as much keeping as possible will allow you to get to those first reps, to even be able to at least rep it once, just so you can start training with one set of 1 rep of muscle ups and finally being able to add more volume, to simply do the exercise. Remembering that most calisthenic skills are hard to learn, that most of them cannot be deloaded without bands. And even so, when you use bands, it is still somewhat different. And if you can do more overall volume if you do keeping, then there is nothing wrong with that. That extra volume will greatly help you become stronger and adapt to the exercise. I don't understand why the standards of people are set as if they are competing. Even some people will belittle your efforts just because you are keeping. Or maybe achieving your first bent arm handstand press with a little bit of keeping, or the momentum generated by releasing your legs from a bent position to a straight one. Keeping in the handstand bent arm press can really make a huge difference, and that difference really matters when you start and are attempting to get your first ever rep. And we must realize one of the reasons beginners stagnate in calisthenics is simply because they can't do enough sets and reps to adapt to the movement, because most of them are really hard. If slight keeping or even a lot of keeping can help you do a few reps in the beginning, so be it. In this case, the purpose of keeping is to do what otherwise you wouldn't be able to do. And doing those few first reps are really important, not only to adapt physically, but also mentally. Achieving some calisthenic skills can be mentally challenging in the sense that it will take a lot of time, and maybe you will get to a point where you are desperate and about to give up. Can you imagine a beginner trying to achieve a perfect form non-keeping muscle up without ever trying a keeping muscle up? If we expect people to do calisthenics, then they must have some feeling of accomplishment, and if keeping can allow them to reach their first reps of anything, to feel that they are getting better, then keeping is a huge win. Keeping shouldn't be demonized, but also shouldn't be a standard. However, it can become a tool to train either to reach failure or get your first reps of muscle ups or any other calisthenic movement, or just to do more overall volume when you are tired just for the sake of it.